Welcome to episode 4 of our growth philosophy series, a series where I essentially talk about my methods to growing as a person, as a human being, and just career stuff. But now since I'm here, now we're starting the second part in our growth philosophy of continuing on. This is going to be like the bulk of the series, I believe. But today we're going to be talking about suffering and how you kind of have to accept it. Like if you notice, in almost everyday life, we try to take the easiest route out. Okay, easier conversation, easier relationship, easier workout routine, easier food life, anything to make things faster, quicker, and more convenient. Right? Why? And because in some aspect, what was that, 10? I don't know. Right? Okay, cool. There you go. Because in some aspect, we are running away from suffering in some form or fashion. But we all know suffering comes for everybody. It has an appointment with each and every one of us. So what if you switch your mindset with, what if it's not that suffering's the enemy and us to avoid it, but what if we try to use it for our benefit? The older I get, the more and more I realize that suffering truly has an appointment with everyone. At least when it comes to suffering, right? You have to learn to carry it. It's not something you should try to eliminate from your life. Now, obviously, there's exceptions to that, but this is just talking about it in a broader concept, in a broader context, right? When it comes to suffering, whether you're rich, poor, you're just starting out on your journey, or you're like 10 years in, whether it's you had the resources or you didn't have them, doesn't necessarily matter. People suffer in a lot of ways that you may not even think about. The point is that you need to try to carry your suffering a lot better than other people, and it'll help you move further. Since suffering is so intertwined with human existence, you kind of have to, one, accept it, but then you also have to ask yourself the question, what is this suffering going to produce in me? What is this suffering going to make me become? What is this suffering going to help me with, help me learn from? All that additional stuff you don't really have to think about. And that's what I'm going to be talking about in this video. Like, think about it like this, right? When it comes to natural disasters, like your hurricanes, your earthquakes, your volcanic eruptions, your tornadoes, right? Those natural disasters destroy cities at times. Those natural disasters, mainly hurricanes, but anyway, when it comes to those natural disasters, it causes people to lose their lives. It causes citywide destructions. It causes people to lose loved ones. There's a bunch of events that happen today that are just always happened throughout human history. And that's not like really important. What's fascinating about it is our response to it as human beings. Because on one hand, it's like these are things that we can't really, prevent or run away from, but there is a way to help mitigate the damage that it has. Like, we have entire engineer teams who are dedicated to help protect us, the regular citizens, the regular people, from these natural disasters, right? We have entire flood protocols. We have tornado shelters, hurricane shelters. We have some people, even in the Midwest, they make bunkers for tornadoes. We have better Amber Alert systems. We have emergency alerts. We have better weather reports. All that stuff combined together shows a demonstration that humanity can indeed evolve or adapt to the earth that we live in, to adapt to the natural suffering that occurs here. All right, here we go. Even in nature, the gazelle gets hunted by the lion. The scorpion stings its prey. The owl kills the mouse, right? All those things can be seen as sad, at least from the human perspective, Because imagine your entire existence, in part, is just to be food for another species. That's kind of sad to think about. But something that a lot of experts may tell you is that you don't want to with the interact with the wildlife because you may train them to behave a certain way, right? You don't want to feed the goose or the geese or the ducks at the park all the time with bread because they're learning to depend on the people to feed them food and bread. It's kind of like if you keep an animal in captivity all of its life, if you release it out to the wild, it's not going to perform as well because it's always been in a cage. It's always been protected. It's always been offered food. It never really had to hunt its entire life. You understand this? Anyway, anyway, from here, from here, humans are a little bit different because we're made in God's image. We have morality, purpose, all the other stuff. But what if we can take that lesson from those animals about at least when it comes to suffering, and acknowledge the fact that what if suffering is for ultimately for our development as a species? What if it's for our development as human beings? What is for development for our morality, for our life decisions? And that's something I tend to think about, at least when it comes to suffering. So here's where things get a bit complicated because now we talk about humanity and just how we form or something, right? Because unlike hurricanes, right? Unlike animal attacks or whatever, human beings are a little bit more malicious and intentional, right? People lie, manipulate, they betray people. Uh, even if you look at some governments, their governments are really corrupt, and people are restricted, just completely dependent upon where they live and who they are and what they believe under that system, right? And how they apply it. And there is really no true way to stop that from happening because that's just in our nature as human beings, right? At least according to the Bible, right? We're just sinful by nature, unfortunately. Now we can overcome it because we have purpose and reason and morality and all this other stuff. But ultimately, how do you handle that? Especially with all that knowledge. I want to say this is 10. Whatever. I'll probably count it and be like, oh, it's so little. But on the other hand, it's more so like, how do we handle that? How do we handle all this intentional suffering that may or may not be caused by humanity, right? You know, a lot of people have different answers. Some want to reform it through law. Some people want to teach it in school as education. Others just want to just annihilate the people who believe whatever is their opposing belief and just make it a lot easier for everybody else for their belief, which poses its own problems, right? Me personally, at this point, it's kind of like I kind of just have to accept it because I'm not really in a position to have a lot of change. I can only be the change that I want to see. Unfortunately, that's where I'm at. I don't really have influence like that. However, through my life, I can try to at least inspire others to not intentionally inflict the same amount of suffering either onto themselves or to other people. But that's just human nature in general. So now that we have reestablished this at least 4 times in this video, ultimately it's not the question that you should pose to yourself. It's not how should you avoid suffering or how do I suffer less. It's really like what should I do when suffering shows up? Because the one is proactive and one is reactive. Okay. Anyway, I'm not even getting into the weeds with that one. Your form of suffering may not be a natural disaster. It could be debt. It could be a failed relationship. It could be anxiety. It can be physical fights in your life. It could be abuse. It could be spiritual warfare. It could be whatever it is, right? But it could be you're not in the place that you want to be at. Some suffering is indeed self-inflicted. In other types of suffering, let me grab this. Yeah. Some suffering is caused by other people, right? And that's just life. It's not fair. Well, life is not fair in general. I think we already know this, just either from our own parents' our own parents' teachings, or just through life experience. Life isn't always fair all the time, and it sucks. So really, no matter who you are, or where you are right now in your life, you at least can acknowledge that suffering is just a part of human life. I've said it like 4 or 5 times already, but I really want to drive that point home, because by accepting that as a part of your reality, you're no longer like denying it, and you're not trying to get around it. By accepting suffering in life, whether it be physical, mental, financial, spiritual, emotional, whatever that looks like for you, you could at least acknowledge where you're at and start going where you need to go in order to either overcome it, or to mitigate it, or to just stay away from it completely. Whatever it is. Because like I said before, some suffering is self-inflicted. Did you Now, what do you do with that, all that information, right? So me personally, I touched on it a little bit earlier, but I take the approach of accepting suffering, just as part of my human existence. Not because I like it, not because like I want more of suffering, but because like fighting suffering is kind of a losing battle. Okay, just because it's almost like a law of nature, just suffering, survival of the fittest, whatever that is, right? There are simply things in this life that are bigger than me. There are simply things in this life that are outside of my control, whether it's God's timing, whether it's governmental entities, whether it's the law, whether it's diseases in nature, whether it's natural disasters. There are just certain things that I can't really control anything about. At the same time, there are other things that I can control, like how I react, what I do and wake up every morning, what I do with every opportunity that I have. I kind of made a video about that before, about um, maximizing your opportunities. But regardless, you you got to make the most of what you got. You got to play with the cards that you were dealt. Some people call, some people fold. Some people, what is it, called, fold, something else. But regardless, you got to play the game or not, one of the two, or forfeit. That's whatever. I don't choose to go the forfeit route. That's just not for me. Like, people who normally grow have three things that they have. They either have the mentality, the opportunities, and the action, right? Either like you need all three in some capacity, right? We might not all get the same opportunities, but we can still act. We might not be able to have the mentality as everybody else, but if we have the action and the mentality, we can act on that as well. And that's what really separates, at least that's what really separates me and people like me from other people, is that you choose how you respond to it and you're conscious of it. You're making a conscious, intentional decision to change regardless of your circumstance. And that's an advantage that you can't really trade anything. You can't buy it. You really can't buy that. Another thing I think a lot of people overlook is that suffering is not here just to make your life harder. Okay? It's really not. It's really here to pull something out of you, to purify the impurities that you have inside of yourself, right? I think in Malachi 3, I love this song. Oh my gosh. It talks about basically, I think God being the ultimate refiner when it comes to silver, right? Really think about that image, right? When it comes to silversmithing, not goldsmithing, smithing. When it comes to silversmithing, a part of burning gold is to burn out the impurities. Shit. Impurities. So, like, similarly, for that image, suffering is not really to, like, obviously it's hot and it's uncomfortable, and that's where growth is at. What happens is when you're uncomfortable. But the whole point is that the suffering is going to produce the character that you're going to need to move on by burning away all the bad stuff that you're dealing with. Like, if you're trying to get rid of an addiction, you're going to experience withdrawals just because that's been your life, because that addiction has been so ingrained in part of your life that when you try to leave it, it's going to fight you while it's leaving out the door. Does that make sense? But regardless, yeah, suffering is truly here to make us better people, whether we like it or not. It's just that we have to have the proper mindset and the proper behaviors to really take advantage of that. Waiting exposes impatience. Like, failure can expose arrogance. Leadership can expose how selfish you are. What else? Freaking rejection can expose insecurity. What else? Freaking success can expose greed. Um, but also, what's another good one? Um, shoot, there's plenty of great qualities that you may or may not have, or not so great qualities that you may or may not have, that get exposed or refined through suffering. Because all that stuff was already there. All that stuff was in your character. All that greed you had, you didn't get to experience it until you got the money. All that selfishness you had, you didn't really get to truly experience it until you started to lead other people and you had to start getting input from others. Are you a tyrant? Are you a democratic leader? Whatever, right? Um, and that's what suffering exposes. Suffering exposes the your inadequacies, and the things that you don't suffer from exposes your character with who you are or whatnot. But there's plenty of other examples that I could have used, but I'm just using those as examples, right? The whole point is that I already said that already. Never mind. Suffering ultimately brings everything that we had underneath us in our hearts or in our minds to the surface. And once you see them, it's dependent on you to change them, right? And this ultimately is where our growth philosophy starts. This is going to be part one because this video is getting kind of long, but this is just preparing you for the next part when it comes to suffering, which is going to be like how to actually handle it practically, right? Everything that we're going to go over, at least during this continuing on part of our growth philosophy series, is you're going to need to accept that suffering is going to be a part of your life, no matter what. Everything we're going to be talking about in detail, whether it's consistency, discipline, learning, patience, whatever we're going to be talking about, all of that stuff is going to be based on how well you can suffer and what you do while you're suffering and what you do when stuff is revealed to you while you're suffering. I take the gym for example, right? Um, if you start lifting 135 with no issue, but your form is off, but you don't really feel it, you might either feel it 10 years from now, or you're especially going to feel it when you start going heavier. You try to lift 225, and because your knees, you didn't bring your knees all the way down, now your knees are hurting because you never realized that you were overcompensating for your form in your knees because you never had to think about it because it was easy beforehand. But that suffering that you experienced while squatting more weight really exposed what you did. So now you have the choice between going back down and fixing your form and ultimately becoming better as a lifter, or you're just going to be stubborn and push past the pain until you get an injury that you may or may not be able to recover from. Even if it's a weight that you can actually do, something that you may encounter is that you're going to have a little voice in your head saying that uh, you can't do the weight anymore. You can't push past what you already did. Your body's going to be screaming at you, telling you to stop. Your mind's going to be dizzy. You're going to be sweaty and tired and dehydrated or whatever it is. And even though you know in your mind that you can do two more reps and you can push to do those two more reps, you're going to be you might stop because of all the other voices and influences inside your heart and how you feel about it, that you're probably going to start and you're going to miss out on that growth because that's where the growth happens in those last two reps where you're struggling to finally push the weight up. Like, not only, at least in that instance, are you fighting the physical battle of becoming better, but you're also fighting your overall consciousness of, hey, look, you probably don't want to be doing this long term because it hurts. And that's something that you're fighting on a regular basis, at least in the gym. Just using that as an example. I think that's truly the battle, not necessarily against the weight, but against myself. And that's where the battle really wars in my being, really. Um, I have to let myself know that my emotions don't control me. They don't get the final say. They don't get the last vote. But ultimately, my discipline that I built, my decisions that I make, and how I think, and ultimately my identity decides that for me. You know. But that's where I'm gonna stop for today. Part two is gonna be coming out very soon. I think you might be see it on Friday-ish. Um, what else? See it on Friday-ish. I hope to see you guys in the next one. Triumph Athletic, code MINT, MINT. for 10% off your off. That's what I'm wearing right now. If you don't like the pants or you like the shirt, please use your code. Help your boy out. I really hope you guys understood what I was trying to say in this video. But if you get nothing else from it, suffering can be a good thing if we decide it to be so, right? Anyway, I just want to thank you for your time, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Adios.